Pay attention to this courtroom footage from November 2018. When the defendant enters through those heavy wooden doors, flanked by a tactical security team in full riot gear, notice something unusual. Notice the way he walks with this unsettling confidence, his head held high despite the shackles binding his wrists and ankles. Notice the tattoos covering every visible inch of his neck and hands. Intricate Arabic calligraphy, geometric patterns, verses that seem sacred, yet somehow corrupted in their placement. But it's what Judge Patricia Morrison is about to reveal about this man's family that will send shockwaves through the courtroom and expose a secret that even federal prosecutors didn't see coming. This is Khalid Rashad Mansour, age 38, and the four families sitting in that courtroom would soon learn that the man who orchestrated an attack that killed their loved ones had been hiding something that would shatter everything they thought they knew about radicalization, loyalty, and betrayal. This is the story of how a terrorist cell's leader maintained a double life that fooled even his closest followers, and how a family secret kept buried for decades would be exposed in the most public way imaginable. You know that feeling when you drive through a quiet suburban neighborhood on a Sunday morning. You see families walking to church, to synagogue, to mosque. You see kids riding bikes, parents mowing lawns, neighbors waving to each other. That sense of peaceful coexistence, of ordinary American life, where people of all backgrounds live side by side. That was Sterling Heights, Michigan. Population 134,000. A diverse community about 20 miles north of Detroit, where mosques stood near churches, where halal markets shared strip malls with Italian delis, where the high school soccer team was a beautiful mix of every ethnicity you could imagine. For the people of Sterling Heights, diversity wasn't a talking point. It was just life. It was normal. Until the morning of March 15, 2017, when that normalcy was obliterated in 47 seconds of coordinated violence that would leave 4 people dead and an entire community questioning everything they thought they knew about the families living among them. Let me take you back to the spring of 2017, back before Sterling Heights became synonymous with domestic terrorism, back when Khalid Rashad Mansour was just another face in the community, just another small business owner trying to make it. Khalid was 36 years old that spring. He owned a cell phone repair shop on Van Dyke Avenue called Tech Fix Solutions. If you asked people who knew him casually to describe Khalid, you'd hear polite, quiet, professional. He fixed phones. He minded his business. He closed up shop at 6 p.m. every day and went home to his apartment in Warren. He'd been in Sterling Heights for 8 years. Originally from Dearborn, Michigan, born and raised in the United States. Second-generation American. His parents had immigrated from Lebanon. In the 1970s, settled in Detroit's large Arab American community, raised 3 children who all went to college. On the surface, Khalid Mansour was the American dream fulfilled. The son of immigrants who built a life, started a business, contributed to his community. But what nobody knew, what even his own family didn't fully understand, was that Khalid had been radicalized online over the course of 3 years. He'd been carefully recruited by individuals with ties to extremist groups overseas. He'd been consuming violent propaganda, attending secret meetings, and slowly building a network of like-minded individuals who believed that violence was justified, that attacks on American soil were not just acceptable, but necessary. And he'd been planning something. Planning it meticulously, patiently, with the kind of attention to detail that would later horrify investigators. The target was the Sterling Heights Community Center, a beloved institution that had served the city for 42 years. The community center hosted everything from youth basketball leagues to ESL classes for new immigrants to senior citizen bridge tournaments. On any given day, you'd find dozens of people there. Families, teenagers, elderly folks staying active. March 15, 2017 was a Wednesday, mid-morning. The community center was hosting a health fair. Free blood pressure screenings, diabetes information booths, nutritional counseling. Exactly the kind of event that brought together people from across the community. Young and old, every ethnicity, every background. At 10:47 a.m., Khalid Rashad Mansour and 3 accomplices entered the community center through different entrances. They were armed with semi-automatic weapons and homemade explosive devices. What happened next lasted less than a minute, but would scar Sterling Heights forever. The attackers opened fire in the main gymnasium where the health fair was taking place. Hundreds of people screaming, diving for cover, running for exits. The sound of gunfire echoing off the concrete walls. Panic. Pure chaos. 4 people died in those 47 seconds. Rebecca Morrison, age 52, a nurse volunteering at the blood pressure screening booth. David Chen, age 67, a retired teacher who'd been getting his blood sugar checked. Maria Santos, age 29, a social worker helping staff the event. And Officer James Wilson, age 41, a Sterling Heights police officer working security who engaged the attackers and likely saved dozens of lives before he was killed. The 3 accomplices were killed in the shootout with the responding officers. Khalid was the only attacker taken alive. He'd been shot twice, but survived. He was arrested at the scene, surrounded by the carnage he'd orchestrated. The investigation that followed was massive. FBI, ATF, Homeland Security, state police, local law enforcement. They tore apart Khalid's life looking for answers, looking for connections, for the network, for anyone else who might have been involved. What they found was chilling. Khalid's apartment was filled with extremist propaganda, handwritten manifestos, detailed maps of the community center with attack routes marked, communications with overseas contacts using encrypted messaging apps, evidence of at least 2 years of careful planning. His cell phone repair shop? A front, a way to maintain the appearance of normalcy while dedicating almost every waking hour to planning the attack. Investigators found that the shop barely made any money. Khalid was living off savings and occasional cash infusions that appeared to come from overseas sources, though tracing the money proved difficult. They interviewed everyone who knew him. Family members who were absolutely devastated, who insisted they'd seen no signs. Customers who said he'd always been professional and quiet. A few acquaintances from a local mosque who said Khalid had stopped attending regularly about 3 years ago had become distant. The 3 accomplices who died at the scene were all American citizens, 2 from Michigan, 1 from Ohio, all radicalized online, all recruited by Khalid, who investigators determined had been the cell's leader, the one who planned everything, the one who made it happen. During his interrogation, Khalid was coldly defiant. He quoted religious texts that he'd twisted to justify murder. He claimed to be a soldier in a holy war. He showed no remorse, no recognition of the lives he'd destroyed. Federal prosecutors charged him with 4 counts of first-degree murder, domestic terrorism, conspiracy, weapons charges. The evidence was overwhelming. This was going to trial, and there was no doubt about the outcome. But as investigators dug deeper into Khalid's background, they began to uncover something unexpected. Something that didn't fit the narrative Khalid had constructed about himself. Something that would remain hidden until the trial, until Judge Patricia Morrison would expose it in open court. Khalid's family history was complicated. His father, Rashad Mansour, had immigrated from Lebanon in 1976 during the Civil War. His mother, Sarah, had come from the same village. They'd met in Detroit, married, had 3 children. Khalid was the middle child. The family had been moderate, integrated into American life. The children spoke English at home, attended public schools, celebrated both American and Lebanese holidays. By all accounts, it was a typical immigrant success story. But there was something the family had kept private, something that only a few relatives knew, something that Khalid himself had apparently suppressed so completely that even his closest associates in the terrorist cell had no idea. Khalid's mother, Sarah, was not ethnically Arab. She'd been born Sarah Goldstein. She was Jewish. She'd converted to Islam before marrying Rashad, had taken an Arabic name, had raised her children Muslim. It wasn't a secret exactly, but it wasn't something the family advertised either. Some relatives knew, some didn't. It simply wasn't discussed. Khalid had grown up knowing his mother's background, but somewhere along the path to radicalization, he'd apparently compartmentalized it, buried it, constructed an identity for himself that had no room for that particular truth. The FBI discovered this during their background investigation. They found birth certificates, immigration records, family documents. They interviewed extended family members who confirmed it. Khalid's maternal grandmother had been a Holocaust survivor. His mother had grown up in a Jewish household in suburban Detroit before her conversion. Federal prosecutors made a decision. They would present this information at trial, not to embarrass the family, not to add to their suffering, but because it was relevant to understanding the complete picture of who Khalid was. It spoke to issues of identity, of denial, of the psychology behind his radicalization. The trial began in September 2018, 18 months after the attack. The prosecution was led by U.S. Attorney Jennifer Walsh, a veteran prosecutor known for her meticulous preparation and her ability to connect with juries. The defense attorney, Marcus Reed, had an impossible task. His client had been caught at the scene. There were hundreds of witnesses. The evidence was overwhelming. The prosecution's opening statement was devastating. Jennifer Walsh walked the jury through the attack minute by minute. She showed photographs of the 4 victims: Rebecca, smiling in her nurse's scrubs; David, holding his grandchildren; Maria, at a social work conference; Officer Wilson, in his dress uniform, receiving a community service award. Then she walked them through the attack itself, the planning, the coordination, the calculated brutality. She explained the terrorism charges, the evidence of radicalization, the overseas connections. The defense's opening was more measured. Marcus Reed acknowledged that Khalid had committed terrible acts. He didn't dispute the facts. His strategy was to argue mitigating factors, to present evidence of mental health issues, to try to spare his client the death penalty that prosecutors were seeking. The trial lasted 5 weeks. The prosecution called witness after witness. Survivors who described the terror of that morning, first responders who arrived at the scene, FBI agents who detailed the investigation, forensic experts who analyzed the weapons and explosives, psychiatrists who evaluated Khalid and testified about his radicalization process. The evidence was overwhelming and deeply disturbing. The jury saw Khalid's manifestos, his communications, his planning documents. They heard recordings of him discussing the attack with his accomplices. They saw surveillance footage from the community center. Character witnesses were called for both sides. Khalid's family members testified, weeping, unable to comprehend how their son and brother had become a mass murderer. His father, Rashad, looked broken. His mother, Sarah, could barely speak. His siblings were devastated. The defense brought in their own psychiatric experts who testified about Khalid's mental state, about the process of radicalization, about how online propaganda could essentially brainwash vulnerable individuals. But even these experts acknowledged that Khalid had known exactly what he was doing, had planned it carefully, had shown clear intent. Throughout the trial, Khalid sat at the defense table with that same cold expression. No emotion, no remorse. His tattoos were visible on his neck and hands, those intricate patterns and verses that seemed to mock everything his victims had believed in. Then came the moment that would define the entire trial. The moment that courtroom footage would later become one of the most watched court videos in recent history. It happened during the penalty phase, after the jury had already found Khalid guilty on all counts. The prosecution was arguing for the death penalty. The defense was arguing for life without parole. Judge Patricia Morrison, a federal judge with 23 years on the bench, had presided over the trial with firm control and obvious gravity. She'd maintained order during emotional testimony. She'd ruled fairly on objections. She'd treated everyone in her courtroom with respect, including the defendant. But during the penalty phase arguments, something happened. The defense had been presenting mitigating factors, trying to humanize Khalid, trying to spare him execution. Marcus Reed mentioned Khalid's family, his upbringing, his background, and Judge Morrison stopped him. She looked at Khalid directly and said something that no one expected. "Mr. Mansour, I'm going to say something that perhaps your attorney should have addressed directly. The court has reviewed your complete family history. I want to make sure you and this courtroom understand something." The courtroom went silent. Every eye was on the judge. "Your mother, Sarah Mansour, was born Sarah Goldstein. She is Jewish by birth. Your maternal grandmother, Ruth Goldstein, survived Auschwitz. She survived the Holocaust. She came to America with nothing and built a life. She raised a daughter who chose to convert to Islam and marry your father. And by all accounts, that marriage was loving, and your mother embraced her faith with sincerity." Khalid's expression changed for the first time during the trial. His eyes widened, his jaw tightened. He looked genuinely shocked that this information was being stated in open court. "You come from a family that embodies everything this country is supposed to be about," Judge Morrison continued. "A Holocaust survivor's grandson, a man with both Jewish and Arab heritage, a family that bridged cultures and religions, and you chose to reject all of that. You chose hatred. You chose violence against innocent people who represented the same diversity that exists in your own bloodline." The courtroom was absolutely still. Some of the victims' families were crying. Khalid's mother, Sarah, had her head in her hands, her shoulders shaking. "I want to make sure you understand," Judge Morrison said, her voice cutting through the silence like a blade, "that the people you murdered that day, the lives you destroyed, they were people who would have embraced someone with your background. They were people who believed in the same pluralistic values that allowed your own family to exist." Khalid was staring at the judge now, and for the first time, his mask had cracked. He looked angry, humiliated, exposed. "This court will take your complete background into account when determining your sentence," Judge Morrison concluded. "But I wanted you to know that we know exactly who you are, including the parts of your identity that you tried to erase." The jury deliberated for 8 hours before returning with their recommendation. They recommended life in prison without the possibility of parole, rather than the death penalty. Several jurors would later say that while Khalid's crimes were horrific, the revelations about his family background and the obvious mental health issues involved in his radicalization made them uncomfortable with execution. Judge Morrison accepted the jury's recommendation. She sentenced Khalid Rashad Mansour to 4 consecutive life sentences without the possibility of parole, plus additional consecutive sentences for the terrorism and weapons charges. He would die in federal prison. There would be no possibility of release, no possibility of parole, no possibility of freedom. When she delivered the sentence, Judge Morrison looked directly at Khalid one more time. "You will spend the rest of your natural life in prison. You will have decades to contemplate the lives you took and the family you destroyed. And perhaps in all those years, you will come to understand the bitter irony of a Holocaust survivor's grandson becoming a mass murderer in the name of an ideology that would have viewed your own grandmother as subhuman." Khalid showed no reaction to the sentence, but several people in the courtroom noted that his hands were trembling. The 3 accomplices who died at the scene were eventually identified and their families notified. All 3 came from similar backgrounds of online radicalization. All 3 had been recruited by Khalid over a period of months. Their families were also devastated, also struggling to understand how their loved ones had been drawn into such violence. The victims' families attended every day of the trial. They sat together in the front row, united in their grief and their need to see justice done. After the sentencing, they held a press conference where they spoke about their loved ones, about the ongoing pain of loss, about their hope that the community could heal. Rebecca Morrison's husband, Thomas, spoke about his wife's dedication to nursing, her kindness, her belief in helping others. Rebecca volunteered at that health fair because she believed in community, service, he said, his voice breaking. She believed in helping people, and someone who claimed to be acting on behalf of God murdered her for it. David Chen's daughter, Michelle, spoke about her father's decades of teaching, his love of learning, his gentle spirit. My father taught for 35 years. He educated hundreds of children from every background. He would have been horrified by the hatred that killed him. Maria Santos's mother, Carmen, could barely speak. She clutched a photograph of her daughter and whispered that Maria had dedicated her life to social work, to helping vulnerable families, to making the community stronger. Officer James Wilson's widow, Catherine, spoke last. She was composed, but visibly struggling. James died protecting people. He ran toward the danger when everyone else was running away. He saved lives that day. He was a hero, and he'll always be remembered that way. The Sterling Heights community rallied in the aftermath of the attack. Vigils were held. Interfaith services brought together mosques, churches, synagogues, and temples. Community leaders from every background stood together and declared that hate would not win, that violence would not define them, that they would remain united. The Sterling Heights Community Center was extensively renovated and reopened 18 months after the attack with enhanced security measures. A memorial garden was erected on the grounds with 4 benches, one for each victim. Their names are engraved on a stone monument surrounded by flowers that community members maintain year-round. A scholarship fund was established in the victims' names to support students interested in nursing, teaching, social work, and law enforcement. The fund has already helped dozens of young people pursue careers in service. The Arab American community in Sterling Heights and throughout Michigan faced a wave of scrutiny and some backlash after the attack. Mosque attendance increased as community members made a point of visible solidarity. Interfaith coalitions worked to combat prejudice and to make clear that Khalid's actions represented a twisted ideology rejected by the vast majority of Muslims. Khalid's family sold his cell phone repair shop and donated the proceeds to the victims' fund. His parents moved out of Michigan entirely, unable to face the community where their son had committed such horror. His siblings changed their last names. The family released a statement expressing their complete condemnation of Khalid's actions and their eternal grief for the victims. Sarah Mansour, Khalid's mother, gave one interview 6 months after the trial. She spoke about her conversion to Islam, about her marriage, about raising her children. She spoke about the pain of learning that her son had become radicalized, had rejected everything she'd tried to teach him about compassion and tolerance. "I raised my children to embrace both sides of their heritage," she said, crying. "I taught them about their grandmother's survival, about the importance of never forgetting the Holocaust. I raised them Muslim with love and faith." And somewhere, somehow, Khalid rejected all of that and chose hate instead. "I will never understand it. I will carry this guilt for the rest of my life." She apologized to the victims' families, though she acknowledged that no apology could ever be sufficient. She spoke about her own mother, Ruth Goldstein, who had died 2 years before the attack. "My mother survived Auschwitz," Sarah said. "She came to this country with nothing and built a beautiful life. She raised me with so much love, and her grandson became a mass murderer. If she had lived to see what Khalid did, it would have killed her all over again." Khalid Rashad Mansour is currently serving his sentence at ADX Florence, the federal supermax prison in Colorado. He is held in solitary confinement 23 hours a day. He has had no contact with his family since his conviction. His mother has sent letters that he has refused to open. Prison staff report that he remains defiant, that he spends his time reading and writing religious texts that justify violence. He has shown no remorse, no acknowledgement of the pain he caused, no evolution in his thinking. There have been no successful appeals. His conviction is final. He will die in prison. The FBI's investigation into his overseas connections continued for years after his conviction. Several individuals in other countries were arrested for their roles in recruiting and radicalizing him. The full extent of the network may never be fully known. The Sterling Heights attack changed federal policy on domestic terrorism prevention. The FBI expanded its monitoring of online radicalization. Social media companies faced pressure to more aggressively remove extremist content. mental health professionals developed new programs for identifying and intervening with individuals at risk of radicalization. The community center implemented security measures that have since become standard at public facilities nationwide. Metal detectors, armed security, emergency response protocols. The tragedy forced conversations about how to balance openness and safety, how to maintain community while protecting against threats. But perhaps the most lasting impact has been the conversations about identity, about radicalization, about the psychology of hate. Judge Morrison's revelation about Khalid's family background sparked nationwide discussion about the complexity of identity in America, about how people choose which parts of their heritage to embrace and which to reject. The case became required study material at the FBI Academy for understanding domestic terrorism. Law enforcement professionals study Khalid's path to radicalization, the warning signs that were missed, the way online propaganda can essentially brainwash vulnerable individuals. Rebecca Morrison was 52 years old when her life was stolen. She'd been a nurse for 28 years. She'd volunteered countless hours at free clinics and health fairs. She'd been planning a trip to visit her daughter in California. Her husband keeps her nursing badge on his bedside table. David Chen was 67. He'd taught high school English for 35 years. He'd been retired for 2 years and was finally getting to do all the things he'd looked forward to. He loved classical music and had season tickets to the Detroit Symphony Orchestra. His grandchildren remember him as the gentlest man they'd ever known. Maria Santos was 29. She'd been a social worker for 6 years, specializing in helping refugee families navigate their new lives in America. She'd been engaged to be married. She'd been saving money to buy a house. Her mother still has her social work textbooks. Can't bring herself to give them away. Officer James Wilson was 41. He'd been with the Sterling Heights Police Department for 17 years. He'd received multiple commendations for community service. He'd coached youth football in his off hours. His children were 14 and 11 when he died protecting strangers at a health fair. They were real people, with families who loved them. They went to that community center on a Wednesday morning expecting to help people, expecting to get health information, expecting to do their jobs. They had no idea that someone filled with hatred had decided they deserved to die. This is their story. And while justice was served, while Khalid Rashad Mansour will spend the rest of his life in prison, Rebecca and David and Maria and James are still gone. Their families still grieve. Sterling Heights still bears the scars. May they rest in peace. You deserved so much better than the evil that found you that day.